Well, George Bush was a dear friend to both Mary Ann and me, and George and Barbara. And we had him up here to the district several times. They visited Griffiss Air Force Base. We went to a ball game down in Cooperstown. He was a dear and cherished friend who led by example. He was courteous, he was generous, he was thoughtful, all the descriptive adjectives on a positive note that I can use describes him. I've never met a finer individual who was so thoughtful and so generous. We got Christmas cards every year from him, and we were invited to the funeral by the family. Couldn't go, unfortunately, but there was never, in my estimation, a finer, more decent human being than George Herbert Walker Bush. He will be sorely missed. We had a fine working relationship. He was a moderate Republican, and as was I, and he was concerned about the environment, as was I. So he would call me over to his office, and we would sit down and talk about issues, and I used him as a role model. So he was just a wonderful, wonderful guy. I lost a dear and cherished friend. He won't be replicated again. He always said he wanted a kinder, gentler nation, and I think that's going to be his legacy. He was always a kind and gentle individual. He worked across the aisle. He got along well with everyone. Even his most fierce political opponents were decent, fine friends of his. And you saw that, all the eulogies that have come out from Bill Clinton, who considered him one of his best friends. And Bill Clinton beat him, and they were fierce political enemies, but he was so good in so many ways. Yeah, he visited Griffiss, and he and Barbara came with him, and Mary Ann came with me. And while the men were overlooking at the military equipment, the planes, and getting briefings, Mary Ann said to Barbara, "Would you like to visit the daycare center?" And she said, "Well, come on, honey, let's go." And so they went to the daycare center, and they did things that they did things together. And then one time, at the vice president's residence, I had one of my daughters, Leslie, there with me for an evening program, and Barbara Bush came and said to Leslie, "Come, let me show you something." She took her upstairs, and she showed her a sampler that Mary Ann had made. I mean, when someone comes, like the Vice President of the United States or the President of the United States, you want to give them something. And Mary Ann came up with the idea of giving them a sampler with the initials of all the kids, their children. And it was hanging in their bedroom. And when he was in the White House, I would occasionally get invited down for some meetings. And I always just sort of sat there in awe, thinking that this kid from Utica, New York, Cornhill section, was at the White House with the President of the United States, and he was giving me advice on things. It was just something I will never, never forget. It's a memory I would cherish forever. But I mean, we watched the television proceedings, and there were tears in our eyes, you know, because we lost someone special, not just for us, but for the nation.